हाँ.
So sir, you wrote a book about middle class struggles, right? So I wanted to ask कि if the middle class is the only one that let's say take up the revolution, middle class is usually the first one जो populism के उसमें पहले गिरता है. क्योंकि आज भी आप देखेंगे तो मेजर वोटर्स ऑफ पॉपुलिज्म अक्रॉस द वर्ल्ड, चाहे वो जर्मनी में AFD हो, इंडिया में BJP हो या फिर US में रिपब्लिकन हो, मिडिल क्लास लोग ही हैं. तो अगर मिडिल क्लास रेवोल्यूशनरीज हैं तो मिडिल क्लास अवॉइड कैसे करें कि उसमें ना गिरे, पॉपुलेशन के उसमें पॉपुलिज्म में, उसमें पॉपुलिस्ट आइडियोलॉजीज में.
तो अभी जो है पॉपुलिस्ट थिंग हैज टेकन अ कंजर्वेटिव टर्न, राइट? व्हाई मिडिल क्लास?
हाँ, आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट व्हाई मिडिल क्लास इज ऑलवेज द फर्स्ट वन टू फॉल फॉर पॉपुलिज्म.
In a way, this is a good question to explore, given the fact that populism has taken a rightward turn all over the world. Populism can be of various kinds, but right now the trend is more of
far right
kind of thing. So this is not to trace a middle class everywhere. If you see the urban areas in India, mostly the BJP wins, but the urban areas in US, like recent New York mayor's poll,
Zohran
Mamdani won. So the urban areas there are actually progressive. They're all Democrats. Urban areas in India, Professor Patrick Heller from Brown University recently in a piece observed this, that urban areas in India are pro-BJP, but the metropolitans in US are pro-Democrat. It's a rust belt in the US which votes. The working class which votes, white working class which votes for the US, for the Republicans. So we need an explanation as to why middle class, why does BJP's agenda reflect middle class interests, which is certain class interests, certain class privileges, to protect certain class privileges.
Also, if we talk about class privileges, like let's take up my Christian university. They mostly have students who want to work for, there is this center for social action for charity work, but most of the students, they have a inherently classist mindset. Let's say anyone comes from outside for a talk, I remember one girl, she went to Netherlands for psychology studying, masters के लिए वो Netherlands गई थी, and when she came back, she was invited into our university, she was invited to talk, and she said कि हम prisoners पढ़े लिखे नहीं होते हैं, prisoners, तो हम prisoners से बात नहीं कर सकते थे, तो मैं वहाँ psychology परसीव नहीं कर पाई. And then there was a girl who said कि I couldn't act in the university acting team because वहाँ पे लोगों को देहाती लैंग्वेज इस्तेमाल करनी होती है and all that. तो urban middle class जो लिबरल हैं, कंजर्वेटिव दे आर सेपरेट, बट जो लिबरल है वो इनहेरेंटली क्लासिस्ट कैसे हैं?
Because class privileges bring certain aesthetics of life. That privilege does not is just a material thing, right? That also becomes a way of life. Values, cosmopolitan, your liberal attitudes, what kind of language you speak, everything is determined by class. I mean, it has links, not that strictly determined, but it has. So when you see from a class vantage point, naturally, in a very organic way, you get these views that you feel they are not rational enough, you feel they are not civic enough, you see they are not virtuous enough. Part of which is true. They may not be civil, but they behave in some other ways, which from your vantage point looks very uncivil to you. Like I'll give you this example of the gym I go. It's a fairly expensive gym. So one of the discussions I had with these gym guys was, I said, why do you have to keep so expensive in a country? This is developing country. If you reduce, you can have bigger volume. More people can afford your gym, and you can have more customers. You don't have to advertise so much and chase. He said, sir, we started like that. But when local, certain communities came in, we had tensions because those at the upper echelons did not like their presence because they were talking loudly, they were staring at women. So now civic attitudes are very different, civic etiquettes are very different. So how do you, that leads to a cultural clash. Class therefore is not just an economic variable. Class is also an identity. Class is also produces certain culture.
But then again, how can one avoid this thing? क्योंकि liberal spaces में almost this is a very common thing. Let's say I come from a liberal space, so there will be an image of centrism, and I believe that centrism is inherently flawed क्योंकि scale is tipped towards far right. Even their centrism is tipped towards far right. So how is it possible that centrism point is completely shifted to actual center? Like, is it even possible for a human being to be truly centrist?
Well, centrism is more about institutional functioning, right? It's not about human beings being centrist. Human beings can be more reasonable and accommodating in life. That is possible. Human beings can always be either reasonable or unreasonable. So, and how human beings respond to social choices or social values, it all depends on how you are oriented through social and political institutions in life. During Nehruvian era, being open, being accommodative, being moderate, being modest were virtues. Today, if you are moderate and modest in the neoliberal era, you are seen as a loser. You have to be aggressive, like Manmohan's animal spirits. You have to demonstrate animal spirits. You have to be aggressive, otherwise you are left behind. The fear of being left out, left behind. In Nehruvian era, it was giving up more for others, being generous. So the values change, civic etiquettes change. So it's not a question of being centrist, but it is the social and economic conditions that have changed so dramatically that people today do not have a choice to be modest. I see this crisis in our students. If you are modest, if you are circumspect, if you are self-critical, we are not living in a society that appreciates these as virtues. It is, you are seen as somebody who lose out, somebody who will fail to impress others. So you are encouraged to be aggressive, make even some false claims about yourself, exaggerate your potential beyond, which is what is also leading to all this rise of mental health issues, right? Because body, mind are all pulled in different directions. You have to live in a very heightened excitement, which easily converts into anxiety, then gets into depression. I think you would know, your generation is, every data shows steep rise of mental issues. Why are you guys so unstable? One, you are opening up the world very early, trying to consume too many things, too vast, too differentiated. Maybe you are not able to cope with that complexities. Two, I think the speed, this shift in value system, this anxiety, this possessive individualism, being unencumbered selves, it's my life, I will do it. This whole pressure of achieving something extraordinary without a due process. For everything there is a due process. So all those things I think leads to that kind of a shift of away from that centrist thinking politically, where people no longer think being accommodative is reasonable, but being accommodative they think is something that is slow, something that you lose out, something that is not a very intelligent thing to do.
Since आपने अब mental illness mention की है, तो there is this trend, हर जगह trend देखते कि men tend to become more far right and women tend to become more liberal. So mental illness का इसमें भी play है कि by mental illness they get pulled into toxic masculinity, which then pull them into further far right circles.
And the other way around also, because they have suffered from toxic masculinity, they end up with mental illness, and then they end up with right wing. The trajectories can be of very many kinds. That India is a society with toxic masculinity, right? By and large, there is a lot of toxic masculinity. There is a crisis of masculinity in India is very deep. So that is also leading to a lot of mental issues. But the difference is that men have social spaces where they can legitimately bring out their aggression. And that is what we are seeing, from road rage to the kind of political system that we are living in, where there is so much of aggression, that short-changing others, treating others badly, getting away by cheating others. All this has become like now very institutionalized in India. all that is necessary because that matches with the requirements of toxic masculinity. You have to be better and above all others. This drive again, which also goes and feeds into neoliberalism, which also feeds into hypernationalism, which also feeds into this whole language of Vishwaguru, we are the leaders, we will preach now. So you can see the convergence, how it's happening.
You said about Vishwaguru language and hypernationalism. So hypernationalism, India में alone problem नहीं. This is the problem of entire Indian subcontinent. Back then, like in 1980s or Nehruvian era, there were efforts to make up a collaborative South Asia. Even with the South Asian University, you see, they tried to make something like EU's Erasmus, but it failed. As of now, though, it's failed because of how many political incidents that take place in SAU. Like recently, there was a case on caterer for serving non-vegetarian food on Mahashivratri in SAU and all that. Do you think that South Asian unity is truly possible? Or is it that we are fragmented from the start by our identities and all?
See, all identities are always in flux and flexible. Nothing like start or end. Identities are marked by differentiation. Identities are always contested. Never anything like a quiet equilibrium where we all will be settled. My identity is vis-a-vis your identity. So identity, Judith Butler says that identity needs the other to claim its specificity, but because of the other, the identity can never realize its completeness. It always will remain partial. You never have complete unity. Right? So identities will always have this conflict, whether it is South Asia, whether it is India, whether it is South, whether it is within caste. The question is, how do we manage those differences? Not that eradicate differences. How do you manage differences where it does not lead to massive conflicts, does not lead to violence, but it's institutionally regulated with enough space for these identities to transform over a period of time into more complex, more differentiated kind of entities. That is the question.
Also, अब जब we have our identities जो influx में, there will be always be separation. There's also one thing कि जो stateless peoples हैं, जैसे इधर के side हो गया रोहिंग्यास, and if European sides there are Romanis, जिनके पास कोई state नहीं है, जिनके home state नहीं, उन्हें recognize करने से मना कर दिया. Do you think they will ever get a state or they will ever get a recognition?
It depends. There's a scholar like James Scott who says that itinerant communities, there are some communities in Zomia land in Southeast Asia where they don't want state. They don't want national identities. They want to remain itinerant. They feel it's more liberating to have a different sense of belonging to land rather than being tied to the state.
So basically internationalism.
Internationalism, it could be free border movement. It is across borders they move. There have been old trade routes where people can settle. They are not tied to land. They are not tied in the sense of territorial ownership. So that can be another way people can imagine. Rohingya and a different that they want state. Palestinians are fighting for state. So there are different multiple imaginations that are now gripping the world. So is statehood the only solution to all conflicts? Or is it that we'll have to reinvent our imagination of nation and state? That's what European Union was. A supranational entity. That was an experiment, but you saw that it failed. South Asia was one. Regional organization like SAARC and others making borders more porous, more open, intra-trade. That can be one way. So there are different experiments that society did, but last 20 years after the rise of the right, again we are back to all this old nationalist language, rigid national boundaries, absolute sovereignty, more firepower, back to conventional warfare, masculine nationalism. Now there is a return of all of this, different trajectory which we saw before this 10 years, 20 years period during 90s, 2000. Now it has come back to. So that itself is a big question. Why did those experiments fail? Why did those experiments take finally this turn? Is a question.
Also one more thing कि जब nationalism spreads, especially in like on a nation scale, usually universities are the one that get targeted first. Like let's take the 2016 case and the JNU case, and after that JNU's reputation is completely ruined as of sorts. Also Umar Khalid still is in jail, and still there are universities that get huge lots of funding, which are technical universities. You see IITs, you see AIMS, they still get huge lot of funding, but when you see DU and JNU, their funding continuously get cuts. What is the reason behind that?
It is something for us to take pride in it that humanities, social sciences began to be such a threat to the ruling elites across to the transnational capitalist class across nations is feeling terribly threatened by social sciences and humanities. So this is why you are seeing the dark side of it, that the reputations are being ruined. I am seeing the bright side of it. That why are ruling elites, why do they assume that we are so subversive? That our mere presence is a threat, like Shakespeare says in Macbeth. Your presence rebukes my genius. Some mere presence of universities like JNU today have become, they seem to become symbolic of rebuking the genius of the ruling elite. They feel small, they feel inferior, they feel threatened, they feel challenged. Why? They should ideally engage with JNU, right? They might feel what's going on in or what JNU stands for, they might deeply disagree. They should have engaged with that, that space. But instead, they ran a campaign, malicious campaign, and that's what happened in the United States. Funds being cut to Columbia, funds being, gunpoint to Harvard. So one should ask this question other way around too. Why humanities and social science and philosophy have suddenly become so subversive in the world? Earlier social science was seen as a very docile. It was all sciences, physical sciences, then was the era of biotech and computer sciences, there was the era of management studies. People said that social science will die a natural death. People tried to close down departments of history. They said that this is all becoming irrelevant, but instead of becoming irrelevant and dying a natural death, suddenly social scientists everywhere are seen as historians, have become so contentious. Political scientists, what they write has become so contentious. Only today an FIR has been filed against a political scientist, Mr. Sanjay Kumar of CSDS. Historian like Romila Thapar, what she writes becomes so contentious for the current regime, both their politics and their sense of history. So I am seeing the bright side, that it is the subversive potential of the craft that we pursue has become so threatening. Now, this is not just about BJP. This is about actually against all regimes. If you see, all state governments in India too have the same attitude to social science, higher education as the right. In that, I don't see actually much of a difference between them.
Also, आपने कहा कि this can be seen with a positive change, but there is also second negative change कि usually let's say take DU में अब if there are multiple changes that occurred, especially with DSJ. DSJ was promised to be a Columbia style journalism college, but it never happened. As of now, I talked to few DSJ students. They said कि the chancellor and the security guards, they don't let them roam around when they have like more than 5 people. They don't let them gather, they don't let them study. And last year I think it's not last year, it's 2022 or 2023, when the Modi question was released, there was the Modi question by the BBC. So they wanted to screen it in DU, but the security guards harassed and I think even beat up some students. Also while these kinds of universities decline because major social sciences courses, they are becoming more and more unfavorable as of now in government unis due to chancellor placements. As you can see, DU has a nice chancellor, so to say. DSJ has a nice chancellor, so to say, in a sarcastic way. But at the same time, there are private universities who are getting on the rise due to this. You take St. Xavier's, you take Symbiosis, you take Ashoka. Doesn't this make social sciences unaffordable for the normal people?
That is the overall project of the governments across the world, to make education in general unaffordable. Because see, we are gone through a transition period. There was a period when primitive accumulation was displacing people into urban areas. The industry could absorb more people than who were displaced. Then we reached a place of equilibrium. Today we are in a phase where there is more displacement than the ability of the economy to absorb. That's after 1970s and 80s we have entered this phase. That there is a faster rate of primitive accumulation, faster rate of displacement than what is being absorbed. So generally the ruling class perceives that as it is, there is no opportunity structure. Opportunities are not expanding. So why have more and more people into higher education? So the earlier idea of education was not just employment, but there was an enlarged enlightenment idea of knowledge, enlightenment idea of information, enlightenment idea of critical thinking. Today, because of this slowing down of economy and this inverse relation between displacement and absorption, ruling class everywhere feels that higher education, if it is kind of turned off with no funding, and people basically have very little opportunity, then you will have lesser social crisis in the world. More and more people will settle to basic skill. This is the new knowledge economy model that we are coming, which is there in our NEP also. Like the bulk of the population will settle down for vocational, ITI, carpentry, electricity work. This is a skill based, we need basic skills. And it will be a small section which is necessary for higher education and advanced knowledge. Most people don't have to enter there because anyway economists cannot afford most people to enter. Just imagine if crores of people in India do PhDs and what will you do with them? So there is a crisis there, but using that crisis, what the right does is to reinforce traditional prejudices, reimagine societies as traditional hierarchies. That is why their agenda is also resonating with majority of people. Because this model of more and more education and more employment, more and more higher mobility, most societies simply cannot afford given the volume. What will people do? But it is tied in Indian case with caste. Like Dalits today are demanding we want English education. All Dalit Bahujans, who are intermediate caste, who are landed, whose parents are peasants, want their children to be educated and move to cities. Nobody wants to pursue agriculture, second and third generation. Now where will all these guys fit in? So right things, if you cut off the opportunities, a farmer's son will continue to farm. A barber's son will continue to manage a saloon. So that way, their imagination is there will be less tension in the societies. And that's why they view higher institutions of higher learning like JNU and DU with suspicion. Because they feel that we are creating unwarranted conflict in society. We feel we are creating transformation of social relations. We are making social relations more equal. They feel we are creating unwarranted anarchy with an unfeasible model because most of them asserting then who will you have to work to do this lower level work. So there is a question there, but perhaps this is not the right way to settle it by disallowing people opportunities. Maybe we should have alternate methods where people can learn for the sake of learning, have knowledge and pursue different jobs that are available, that we can reimagine that mode of system as long as we have a positive, healthy attitude towards knowledge system as a process of self-discovery rather than just learning a few basic skill sets and settle down in a moderate job.
And this is my last question. So regarding the recent drama with the ECI and the Supreme Court ruling, do you think कि Supreme Court का dogs वाला ruling is kind of a, let's say, a way to distract the audience and distract the media space. Because after that thing, after the Supreme Court, the only protests that are going on are over dogs. You see, I don't want to delegitimize them, but if you see, the dogs protest are way more than normal protests. SSC के protests हुए थे, there were very few people. Before that, there were also protests for NEET. It was rarely, very loosely covered, so to say, not in a positive light, not in a center light. They just wanted to show that this is student, they are struggling, but we are here to help while light. They never show them that they are fighting against the system and the NTA. But here the dogs one, they actively villainize the one, and they call them the tum nela pallo, tum saap pallo type things.
Yeah, but that's the throughout this last 10 years, that has been the BJP's method of governance. Right? एक issue आया तो divert it to creating another, some sensational issue which people they feel might be interested in because of its entertainment value. So अभी dog है, then उसके बाद chief minister got slapped, Delhi chief is another story. Then today an academic FIR has been filed against. So whole thing is that now they want to disallow a momentum being built for opposition narrative. So that's why they will keep doing 100 odd things. Now whether all this is happening, consonance, why did Supreme Court give a judgment at this moment, these are all very speculative things. One can only second guess given the nature of coordination this current regime is capable of. One imagines that maybe all these are coordinated acts, but one can never know for sure that that's happening. Is it being released to divert at this point of time? Like last time before Gujarat, Bihar election, you had that actor Sushant Singh who committed suicide. So that girl Riya Chakravarti, they chased her for 3 months. As soon as Bihar election was over, that issue was dead. So to see the pattern that has emerged over, that is one of the methods of how this government wishes to deal with important issues by generating other sensational. This was the method in the Roman republics, old, ancient, like gladiators. New republics needed people to be entertained, because there was the idea of the mobocracy. The mob is a dangerous thing. So you entertain them. So they are following that. They entertain people now. They don't give you information. Like news channels also become source of entertainment, right? Who screams more, who abuses who, people are abusing each other, somebody is crying, somebody is falling down, they are also beating up each other. So all this has become like a huge entertainment industry. So that's, I think, a very conscious way which is they picked up from old rule books, how to rule, from Chanakya to Greco-Roman to Machiavelli. They all mentioned this entertainment and enthusiasm is one way to keep people involved in ecstasy. That's what they're following. To some extent it's working, but how far will it work, especially with this voter list, looking at the response in Bihar, will it really keep working the way they're imagining? Something we have to wait and watch.
Also one last thing, मैंने पिछली बार भी यही कहा था, but the BJP is not fighting elections on the name of BJP. They always fight on the name of Modi. But at some point Modi has to retire, right? So at that point, do you think the BJP's the image that will diminish क्योंकि सिर्फ मोदी की image बनी है? Wherever you will go, there is always a bigger photo of Modi. So do you think कि अगर if Modi retires, the BJP can fall apart into corporate sectors and far right sectors?
Well, that's a very speculative question. We don't know that, but all demagogues centralize power. That's one feature. The other is demagogues always don't want the parties they belong to do well after they retire. That's a very interesting logic of the demagogues, because they want to remain so exclusive, so unique in history. But Modi would want everyone to remain that this 15-year run, the high point of BJP, should always remain the high point in history. He will never want someone to come and under whom the BJP can do better. That is why I think BJP will be in crisis, but demagogues also deliberately and consciously want their parties to be in crisis. They want them to be rudderless. They might even incite a crisis. Because they don't want somebody to come and do well. They want to remain. That is the demagogues. This it borders on narcissism. But I and I alone should own and be the greatest memory. That is why this conflict with Nehru, that is why this conflict, continuous postering, continuous media management. So it becomes like a self-absorbed and self-serving kind of a thing. After a point, it I think lacks the sense of time and space. They keep just doing it. So that they will do. So that is one big hope for the opposition. But Modi's retirement might be still a long way away.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.